أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you for joining us, inshallah, once again, or from the beginning for some of you, for yet another subtopic within our life series, a course, inshallah, that will hopefully be useful, beneficial to us all. And today, inshallah, is going to be our introductory course, or introductory lesson to this series of lectures within the bigger series that we are going through, inshallah. So for today, inshallah, we will simply begin by providing a bit of a context. We're calling it a recap, but it is not meant to be a recap necessarily to give an overview of what we have covered, as much as it is to understand how this specific topic fits into the bigger picture of what we are trying to achieve, what we're trying to understand within our religion for the place of reason and knowledge within our faith, within Islam. Inshallah, after that, we want to explain why this topic we believe is important and relevant and has its place as we study religion. And then finally we'll provide an overview of what we will be covering, inshallah, in this specific series. And a little bit of the purpose here, the overview, one, inshallah, is to make it easier for everyone to follow along, to understand the logic. And perhaps after the lecture today, to get a little bit of feedback in terms of how much depth and how much detail do we want to get into or not with regards to this specific series. And inshallah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It is designed to move fast enough so that we end up with about 15 lectures in total for this specific topic or series or course. But we could easily make it a lot more, and I'll give some examples as we go through the overview of the topics to see where we could expand a lot more if we wanted to, if there is interest. Otherwise, there are other courses that are supposed to follow this one, just so that we finish this theme of knowledge and reason in Islam, and we are still in the first theme. And so there are those, and we are all part of them too. We want to keep moving in this series to other themes, inshallah, too. But at the same time, there is a lot to be covered and to be discussed in what we are talking about as well. And so we're trying to keep things relevant and keep things based on the interest and the demand, while making sure that we cover all the essentials, at least in each one of these series and each one of these courses. As part of our recap, and as we said, the point here is not to say, for instance, make anyone feel like you have missed a lot, or that you have to go back and listen to all of this, or if you haven't listened to all of this, then you will be completely lost in what we're trying to do. Not at all. So a quick remark, and we can come back to this remark again. As part of this entire series, and this specific course is no different, inshallah, every lesson, every lecture is always designed as a standalone. So that if someone only attends one lecture, and you do not attend previous lectures, and you do not attend following lectures, you still benefit from that lecture. You're not going to be lost, you're not going to be confused, and the topic that you get still has a beginning and an end. Every lecture is designed this way, but they are also part of a longer series. And so if you can attend the fuller series, of course, inshallah, you will benefit that much more from the entirety of the series and how the lessons or the lectures link together. The big series in which this course is included or is part of is called Life. The full title is Life, the Islamic Answer. It is meant to do a few things. The first one is that we want to see, as its title implies, we want to see how this religion of ours, how Islam, is truly an answer to everything we need in our lives. And we want to do this in depth. We want to do this in a way that the Muslim truly feels that they have a good understanding of their religion, not only in general, but in a way that allows them to apply it in their day-to-day lives. Especially for people like us, Muslims living away, minorities, living in societies where the majority of people are not Muslims. We have to understand the spirit of our religion. We have to understand the universal principles in our religion. We have to understand the general principles that we can apply to specific situations. Even though we may not have very precise, specific instructions about every situation, we have enough about the principles and the general spirit of this religion that we know how to apply it to our day-to-day lives, and we said as specific individuals as well as societies or communities. And so this series has this type of vision to present the entirety of our religion. It is divided, or it is classified or organized based on a number of themes. The themes are supposed to cover the general themes and the general needs of the human being in their life. We structured them based on what we think is going to be the most relevant, the most useful, the most beneficial, the most important. And so we began with theme 1, which is knowledge and reason and Islam. And we did not come up with this by ourselves, for ourselves. We took this directly from our religion. Our religion says that everything starts from knowledge and reason. Your ability to understand, your ability to educate yourself, your ability to study the right things is going to allow you to become the full person you're supposed to be. Everything else becomes a detail to that, comes out of that, is derived out of that. Content and methodology about this specific series. The first thing about this series is that it is supposed to provide you with the content that you need, the material, the substance that you need. And secondly, it's supposed to teach you an approach, or here it's called a methodology. In a lot of cases in our daily lives, we know a little bit about religion from things that we have heard here and there. We may have heard it through stories, bits and pieces of information, from lectures, from things that we have read. What we are trying to do here is to also equip ourselves with the proper way of studying this religion. And so we're not just going to the conclusions. We're also starting to see how religion is supposed to be studied. If I want to know what religion says about something, how do I do that? So what we're trying to do here is not to jump directly to, this is what religion says, take it from me, just trust me on this. I'm a reliable source, I'm just going to give it to you and you're going to accept it from me and move on. This series is not meant for that. This series is meant to teach you how to think religiously, to give you the tools for that. And that's why it moves a little bit slower. But this movement in itself is part of the education. So the focus, if we're saying it's truly religious, the focus has to be on what? Has to be on the scripture. Has to be on the verses of the Holy Qur'an and how to understand them, and has to be on the sayings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. And this is a major difference between this and even some of the best books that we have, and sometimes lectures and series that we have that present to you the conclusions. They will not walk you through the verses, and they will not walk you through the hadith, the narrations that talk about a topic. They will give you the conclusions from having looked at all of that. They'll tell you this is how you're supposed to be. Here we're looking at the actual proofs, we're looking at the actual verses from the Qur'an, we're looking at the narrations, so that you know what we're relying on, and you will be able to quote these. You will be able to reference them. If you want to think about these topics, if you want to talk about them with someone else, you will not say, I think this is what religion says. I heard this is. No, you'll be able to say, Imam al-Sadiq says this. Imam Ali alayhi salam said that. And you want to be able to do that in all things that are supposed to be important in your life. Don't rely on secondary and tertiary information. Someone said something and this is maybe their understanding of what they read, and no, go directly to the source. So here we're trying to go directly to the source. So we will look at the proper content, and we won't talk about this when we go through it, but you will see that our approach is always going to include a heavy reliance on the verses of the Qur'an and a heavy reliance on the narrations of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And sometimes you will see that sometimes it may look like the hadith are very repetitive. Sometimes they are. But if I'm choosing the hadith, I'm choosing the hadith because in every hadith there has to be something a little bit different. There's a twist, there's a nuance, there's a subtle detail that is perhaps not mentioned in another hadith, or sometimes it is just to indicate how much of an insistence there is on a certain topic in our hadith. If you have a hadith from the Holy Prophet ﷺ alone about something, we're not saying that it's not important. But we're saying it's strange that only the Holy Prophet mentioned it and we have nothing from any of the Imams. But if I take a topic and I see that there's a hadith about it, or at least we go through a hadith about it from the Holy Prophet, and another from Imam Ali, another from Imam al-Hasan, another from Imam al-Hussein, another from Imam al-Sajjad, al-Baqir, al-Sadiq, then you start to see, okay, this must be something important, that we see every Imam coming back to it and talking about it. This is important. They want to make sure that their followers understand that this is important. Okay, that's all we wanted to say about the series. Now we talk about what we have covered until now. And again, this is not to say if you are joining now, because this is a new series, this is going to be something that is not going to be useful for you. You have to go back and re-listen, re-study all of this. We're just trying to make all of this fit into a logical transition. So that if you think about this topic that we are about to enter, which is the types of knowledge that Islam says we should acquire, where does that fit? Is that the first thing we start with when we think about knowledge? So we'll explain that. No, there are things we have to establish first before I jump into the types of knowledge I study in Islam. So first, we talked about, generally speaking, the importance of knowledge and the importance of reason in Islam. And the conclusion from that study was that our religion does not say that knowledge and reason are important. It says that knowledge and reason are necessary. You do not have a choice but to acquire knowledge and reason if you want to be a good Muslim. This is not a luxury. This is not a nice to have. Now, depending on how good of a Muslim you want to be, you can decide where this starts and stops for you. But a good Muslim will be the one who will have, and we talked about this throughout the series, you should have a program for yourself for your whole life. The pursuit of knowledge should never stop. You have to prioritize and you have to think about, what do I study next? Where is it most useful for me? Where is it most beneficial for me? If this is true that in our religion, knowledge and reason are necessary and we do not have a choice but to work on that. That was the first and second bullets here. Then we move to the alternative. The alternative to knowledge and reason. And we saw that our religion has taken great care in talking a lot about the alternative. And the alternative is jahl, which translates as two words in English. Translates as ignorance, which is not having information, and it translates as foolishness. Not having the wisdom to act appropriately, to think appropriately. Those two words together equal the word jahl in Arabic, foolishness and ignorance. In our religion says, without knowledge and reason, you are falling into jahl. This is the only alternative. Either you have knowledge and reason, you know how to use your reason, and you continue to acquire knowledge, or you fall into jahl. You fall into ignorance and foolishness. And so we spent a little bit of time seeing what our religion says about jahl. And the conclusion from that was that jahl cannot be an acceptable option for us. Islam says the good Muslim cannot fall into jahl. Okay, so we come back to knowledge then. So what do I do now? And so here we said before going further, I have to understand what is this knowledge that Islam tells me is so important that it is necessary. And here we said it is easier to understand the conditions that I have to meet for the information to be called true knowledge in my religion, as opposed to defining this knowledge. And we saw that there are two conditions. Islam says for something to be called true knowledge, true ilm, it has to meet two conditions. The first condition is that you acquire it and you use it with good intentions. Secondly, the second condition is that you act on the knowledge you have acquired. That's it. So in our religion, and inshallah, we will talk about the types of knowledge starting today. But before we even get to the types of knowledge, these two conditions are the truly defining characteristics of knowledge. Before I say what type of information I'm getting, before I say, is this information about the Qur'an or is this information about biology? Before I get to that in my religion tells me there are two conditions I have to focus on first. To call this true ilm, true knowledge or not. One, is it acquired with the right intent? Is it going to be used with the right intent? That's one. And two, are you going to act on the knowledge or you're just going to accumulate information and do nothing with it? Those two conditions are much more important than the type of information you get. And that's why until now, you see that we didn't talk about the type of information. What do I study? Do I start with salah? Do I start with fasting? Even before we get to the type of information, I have to meet these two conditions. Acquire it with the right intention, use it with the right intention, and act on the knowledge you have. The accumulation of information and bits and pieces of data, this is not considered ilm, this is not considered knowledge in our religion. This is not true knowledge. People may refer to it as knowledge. I may have degrees, I may have listened to lectures, I may have, if I didn't do this with the right intention, one, and two, if I'm not planning on or not acting on what I learned. I know I have heard that it is good to give charity. I know 17 hadith by heart about giving charity, but I don't give any charity. I don't act on any of the knowledge I have. Islam says this is not knowledge. Why is this important? Because we're about to start talking about the amazing rewards we have when we acquire knowledge. But that knowledge has to meet these two conditions: the intention and the action. It doesn't need to be a lot. We didn't talk about volume and quantity. A little bit of knowledge acquired with the right intention and acted upon is worth much more than a lot of knowledge and you do nothing with it. Or your intentions behind that knowledge are not sincere. Okay, so these were the two conditions. Once all of that was out of the way, we said, okay, so let's start. Let's begin this journey of knowledge. What does it look like? So the journey means I now have to start acquiring the knowledge. So I become a learner. And funny coincidence, my religion has given a huge importance to this figure, to this character called the learner, طالب العلم. It's important enough as a role that my religion has a lot of instructions around it. It didn't ignore it. It didn't leave it for me to decide what that looks like and what happens in this case and how to define it. No, it gave me hundreds of ahadith related to it. So we started to talk about the learner. Now that I am on this journey of knowledge and reason, using my reason, I fall in the category of the learner. And here we spoke about the learner and their rewards and their efforts and how to manage their time and everything that we found, and we saw that our religion has a lot to say about this. But then right away we started to talk about the teacher or the scholar. We refer to it as alim. Often we translate it as the scholar, alim. But that's not the real translation of alim. Alim is someone who carries ilm. That's it. Someone who carries knowledge. So when does this happen? It happens as soon as you become a learner. As soon as you start learning, you are now carrying the knowledge that you have acquired as a learner. If you have only started to learn for 2 weeks, you're carrying knowledge equivalent to 2 weeks. If you've been learning for 20 years, you're carrying knowledge worth 20 years. That's the only difference. But both of these people are carrying knowledge. Why is this important? Because just like the learner has duties and responsibilities and etiquettes and manners and a certain way they should carry themselves, the moment you start carrying knowledge, there's also responsibilities that come with this. There are certain expectations that come with this, including sharing the knowledge that you have. You have to find ways to start spreading the knowledge if you believe that this is true knowledge that others also benefit from. You are now, whether you like it or not, whether you realize it or not, you are now in the category of the teacher and the scholar. Because now you carry knowledge. And there is certainly someone who can benefit from the knowledge that you have, whether it is little or a lot. So long as you are sure of this piece of information, it is worth sharing. Okay, and then we started to talk about the idea of the community of knowledge. Who else should be part of this journey? We were at the level of the individual. We were talking about you as an individual and I as an individual, alone, isolated from the world. I by myself should become a learner. And I by myself, once I have become a learner, have now become someone carrying knowledge, and I have duties and responsibilities associated with that. Now what? Now we have to find the other people who are in this category, who care about the knowledge, who are learning the knowledge, who are spreading the knowledge, so that we can maybe create a community of knowledge. What does that community of knowledge look like? Why should we care about it? Who should belong to it? This is what we talked about in the idea of the community. And so here we said, who belongs to the community? Here we should have an indent. These words afterwards, the everyone, the youth, the family, woman, and intellectual, should all be under the community. They're not at the level of the community. So who should be part of the community of knowledge? One, everyone. And we saw the hadith that talk about this. Everyone in a community of believers has to try to find for themselves a role, a duty, a function, a support that they can provide to the community of knowledge. You can be a learner, you can be a teacher, great, but you can be a lot of other things. And we saw that in the ahadith, Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam talk as simple as loving those who love knowledge makes you part of the community of knowledge. Supporting them. It doesn't mean that you are learning yourself or that you are teaching yourself, but you find a way to support them. You are now part of that community. Everyone. Then we said, okay, everyone is good, but we see that either our religion has given a special importance to some people, some categories of people who should belong to that community of knowledge, or we have a special need as communities to talk about these figures. And so then we started to look specifically to certain figures, certain groups of people, to see what our religion says about them when it comes to knowledge. The first one is the youth. The importance that our religion has given to acquiring knowledge by the youth and teaching knowledge to the youth. And we went through the definitions and we saw that the youth can include anyone born all the way to, from the time you are born to much later in life. And we saw even a hadith saying that it has nothing to do with age. There's a special emphasis on age because we learn differently. When you're 5 years old and 7 years old, you learn differently than when you are 25. And you learn differently when you are 60. And you have other duties and responsibilities and affairs that you're dealing with in life, where you have time and ability now that you would lose later in life. And so we saw that our religion has given a lot of emphasis to the youth. That's one. Two, the family as a unit. We saw that the whole family is mentioned together, not as isolated people, as individuals that become a family. No, the whole family is one unit. Now I'm looking at the family as one, not as pieces. Not as there is a father and there is a mother or there is a spouse or there is a child. These are relationships within the family. But the whole family taken together is one unit. And we need that whole family to be part of the community of knowledge, which means we have to rethink how to build our community so that there is a place and a role for everyone in the family. Then we spoke about specifically the role of women in the community of knowledge. And here we said because specifically this is an area where we need to discuss and study a lot more. And where perhaps there is a lot of misunderstanding about the role of women. So we spoke about that. We went through the history of some of the women who became great scholars, women who became the teachers of great scholars, at the highest level of standard of knowledge and education, of technical knowledge, of providing certificates to others. So we spoke about all of that, and then finally we spoke specifically about the role of what we called the intellectual in the community of knowledge. Who is the intellectual? The intellectual is the person who does not carry specialized religious knowledge. You're not a specialist in religious knowledge. You may have any other type of knowledge. You're just not a specialist in aqa'id or fiqh or akhlaq or tafsir. You haven't studied those extensively. Do you have a role to play or not? So we spent, 15, 18 lectures talking about the role of the intellectual in the community of knowledge. This is what we have covered until now. If this is interesting to you and you want to go back, the lectures are available and you may listen to all of this and inshallah benefit. If not, that's fine too. Starting from this point is great, and you can definitely start and benefit from this point. But the reason I'm mentioning this is to say that when we are talking about the types of knowledge, this is within a certain logic. Now we want to understand what that logic is, so we just explained it. How did we get to saying that studying the types of knowledge in Islam is important? Now that we have covered this, I want to know, so what do I study? So here are the questions I'd like to start trying to answer in this course, this specific course of ours. Where do I start? Until now, after everything we have said, we haven't said specifically, go and study this field. Go and study this area of knowledge. We haven't said that. So where do I start? And then how do I follow along? Is there a sequence? Should I give more importance to certain types of knowledge, disciplines, fields? That's one. Two, what do I study? In general, without necessarily looking at a sequence. What should be studied overall based on Islam? What does Islam say to study? How much should I study? How far should I go in studying whatever I'm being told to study? And this is a big question because it can lead to the next one. Should I become a generalist or a specialist? Should I become more of someone who has general knowledge about a lot of things, about everything? Or should I ignore most things and just focus on one thing and become a specialist in it? If I had to choose between being a generalist and being a specialist, which one should I choose? Or do I have to choose? What does my religion say here? Should I spend all my time studying religious disciplines? Or should I also study other things that are not considered to be religious disciplines specifically? What else should be studied based on Islam? What does the Holy Qur'an say? What do Ahlul Bayt say? Spend all of your time reading aqa'id and reading fiqh and reading akhlaq? If that's what it says, that's what I'll do. Or does it say go learn other things? We'll try to explain those answers. And then, there's a certain way to look at the world that is a lot more based on the material causes of the world. How does the world work? It works based on material causes. If I want something to happen, if I want a house to be built, I have to go to an engineer. There are people who are going to come and do the construction, draw the plans. All of this is material causes. I rely on worldly material causes to get things done. If I want to do something related to economy, if I want to do something related to society or politics or engineering or technology, I can rely on material causes. Or I can also think about the supernatural. I can pray to God to make these things happen. Where is my role in all of this? Praying to God is a specific type of knowledge. How do I pray to God? Is a type of knowledge that I find much more in spirituality. Material causes is what I find in the day-to-day life of the world, worldly things. I can go and get an engineering degree. Material things. What does my religion say? Do I do one? Do I do both? Do I give more importance to one over the other? This has a huge effect on how I design my life from the point of view of knowledge. What do I study and how much time do I spend and how much effort do I put into the type of knowledge that I'm studying? So this series that we're about to start today is trying to answer these questions. So inshallah by the end we'll have a lot more clarity on these questions. What will we cover? So this is an overview, inshallah, of what we will be talking about in the next weeks. The first, so you'll see that these are actually going to be designed and presented to you based on groupings of types of knowledge. The first type of knowledge that we will see Islam telling us to study or to think about or to understand is what we're going to call general principles. Before I go into a specific field, and we will see that there are a lot of riwayat and a lot of verses of the Qur'an that talk about specific fields. Islam also gives me general principles. And those are as important as what it tells me about specific fields. Because the general principles are going to allow me to apply them to whatever situation I'm in life. And we're going to see a lot of these examples. One example, for instance, is that Islam is going to tell me that there is just too much knowledge to learn. And so you have to be selective. And you have to learn how to prioritize. And you have to prioritize in the right way. These are all general principles. It hasn't told me yet what to study. It's just giving me the general principles. So we will see that, inshallah. Then we have the narrations and we have the references where Islam is telling me specifically, go study this field. Go study this type of knowledge. This type of knowledge is very important. You don't have a choice to study this type of knowledge. To be a good Muslim, this is part of the minimum that you should have. So we'll see what those are going to be. We will then start with what we call religious knowledge. We'll start with that one. That's probably the first one that comes to mind. We want to get it out of the way. What is this general religious knowledge that Islam tells me to study? And why is it so important? Why do I study this religious knowledge first? And we'll see here it's because this is going to formulate and give us our worldview. My religious knowledge is going to tell me who I am and what's my relationship with the world. It becomes the lens through which I see the world. Before I go and study anything else, before I go and understand anything else, I do anything else, I want to understand who am I, what's my relationship with God, what's my relationship with society and other people, what am I doing in this world. All of this comes to me from my religious knowledge, or what today we call our worldview. Your worldview comes from your religious foundations. This is your aqidah. This is your relationship with God. What are you doing here? Where do you come from? And where are you going? This gives direction and meaning to your life. Then, beyond this, religion will also tell me how to act, how to build my character, and how to work on the aspect of life that we don't really have access to. I can't just learn this on my own by myself by doing trial and error, which is spirituality. What do I do with the soul? What does the soul really need? What type of food does it need? What type of training does it need? All of this comes from religion. And then religion will tell me there's two more things I want you to learn that are important, and we can truly label them as part of religious knowledge. The first one is learn about yourself. Who are you? What does it mean that you are a human being? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What gives meaning to your life? What makes you happy? What gives you purpose? All of this is under learning about the self. And then this world. This religion gives a lot of importance in making sure that I understand the nature, the reality of the world I live in. I can't just go on in this life day in and day out without realizing where I'm in, what am I supposed to do, where is this headed. And that's why you see so much insistence in the Holy Qur'an and the hadith about this notion of dunya. Why? Because I need to know this is the world I live in right now. What kind of world is it? What is my relationship to it supposed to be? What does that mean? How does that change how I behave in this world? All of this, we are still in the first heading, which is religious knowledge. So inshallah, we'll go over all of this quickly. This is just to cover the headings. Then we'll see that our religion tells us you need to understand and study the natural world. You need to study and understand how your body works. You need to study and understand medicine. You need to study and understand everything that today we would call biology. Study and understand the animal kingdom. Study and understand the plants world. The Qur'an is full of this, by the way. Study and understand how the weather works. Study and understand geology. What is the role of mountains? What is the cycle of water in nature? All of this is natural science. We'll see that Islam says, go and study it, and go and understand it. We could say today, go and specialize in it. What else? History. And here there is a lot that can be said. Our religion says, go and study history. Which history? If you go back to the Holy Qur'an, you see the Holy Qur'an has spent a lot of time telling us about history. The stories of the prophets is all history. The stories of their nations, the stories of other nations, previous nations. The Qur'an says, go walk in their homes, walk in their lands, study where they lived. So all of that will give us general understanding about human history. Then specifically, there's all of Islamic history. Beyond the world history, there's Islamic history. What happened during the time of the Holy Prophet? How did we get to where we are today? What happened during the life of Imam Ali, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Askari? Shouldn't I make a little bit of an effort to understand some of this? Maybe it'll drastically change how I think and how I understand the world. And maybe it will inform me about what is going on in my world today and how I'm supposed to live. Maybe a lot of the things that I think are so new and the world is so complex and so different from the past is in fact a copy-paste of what happened 10 centuries ago, 14 centuries ago, 12 centuries ago. Or things that happened during the lifetimes of the Imams, and the Imams dealt with it and told their followers exactly how to deal with these types of situations. And then, the last point, the principles and the philosophy of history. This is when we take the discussion to a slightly higher level. What conditions allow a group of people to become a civilization? What makes one of these civilizations fall? Here there are a lot of theories, a lot of schools of thought. Some think that history is cyclical. Things just keep repeating themselves. If you know where to look and how to look, you'll see that humanity just keeps repeating itself. Some think that what allows groups of people to become a civilization is all based on economic factors. And once those decline, then that civilization declines. Others focus on geographic conditions. Access to water. Mountains that protect you from wars. Access to other resources. That's how groups of people become a civilization, and then lack to those resources will make that civilization fall. There's a lot of theories here. And this is part of the feedback I wanted to hear from you at the end, to see how far do you want us to go here. I plan to cover all of this quite quickly. But if there's interest, we can spend a bit more time on any of these. There's entire volumes written. Some of the biggest world historians have focused on these ideas. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire. Why do they write 10 or 14 volumes on that? Why? Is it simply out of interest in the Roman Empire? There could be a curiosity in the Roman Empire. They're not interested in the Roman Empire. They're interested in the universals. They're interested to see what conditions seem to be the same today that will allow a group of people to see their civilization get erected, and the opposite, to have civilizations today start to fall, to decline. So we could spend more time on that or not. We'll see depending on the interest. Islam will tell us that it's important to acquire what I'm calling here life skills. An ability to live in this world. An ability to understand how to have a dignified sustenance, livelihood, get a job, make money, become self-sufficient as a person, as an individual, and as a community. We'll see that there's a lot here that can be said about these life skills that I should learn. How do I live and how do I manage a family? How do I live and how do I manage a community? How do I live in a society and I manage my relationships with others, especially if they're not Muslims? All of that falls under general life skills. And Islam says a lot of things about all of this. And then finally, this notion of development. Usually this is more collective. For a community, for a society, to work on this idea of development. To develop economically, culturally, educationally, so that you're constantly progressing and becoming better. Because the only other alternative is to go backwards. You're either improving and developing or you're falling. Then there's a section that I called How the World Really Works. This doesn't exist this way in the ahadith. We have to go hunting for this piece in bits and pieces of ahadith and verses of the Qur'an. But to me, it's very clearly there. I'm going to go through these, but I'll begin by telling you what this means to me. This is your understanding of how the world really works, in the sense that you are no longer naive. You're not a simpleton. You don't stay innocent to be used and abused by others. Trickery does not work. You can read between what is happening to see the truth. This is extremely important in the teachings of Ahlul Bayt to their followers, by the way. They want people who have insight. People who read between the lines. People who understand what is truly happening. How are things being managed? Where are we headed? What is being planned for us? All of this falls under how the world really works. And so in here, we can talk, for instance, about how society works. As an example, I listed one example. And here there's a lot more that we can add. I just listed the ones that I thought we can at least mention quickly as part of this series. And there's a lot more, and for each of these we could spend lectures and lectures on each one of these. When it comes to how society works, for instance, there's the whole psychological aspect of groups of people together. When you put human beings together, they act in a different way than when they are alone. And this leads to ideas like herd mentality, to mass, anything that is related to mass. When you hear mass, mass communications, when anything related to mass groups, large groups of human beings together. How crowds work together. Are they more or less objective? Are they more or less intelligent? Are they more or less critical? And what does that do for you? You have to be aware of that because you are, whether you like it or not, part of a mass. Can you rely on what is happening in mass culture? Can you just take it for granted? Then we have a lot of hadith that explicitly tell us that it is very important to understand your time. So knowledge of the times, meaning the world you live in. Today in 2025, this is my time. I live in this place in this time. It might be good for me to understand what happened 10 centuries ago. But it's much more important for me to understand my own time. And how things happen in my own time. How does the world work today? Including politics and decision making and laws. Who decides these laws? How do they come to be? Can I play a role in this, or am I just passive and everything is just dumped on me and I'm subjected to it? Or can I actually do something about it? Do I want to do something about it? Maybe, maybe not. As an individual, maybe not. Maybe as a community, I do care. Maybe I do care that a law does not pass that forces girls or women to not be allowed to wear their hijab when they go to work or they work in national institutions. Maybe that's important. And maybe I need to know how laws come together. Maybe I need to be part of that cycle, part of that process. How does culture work? What is today's culture? What is included in this culture? What is given importance? What gives you credit? What gives you power? What allows you to have value in this culture? How do you use it for greater good? The education system. Does it work? Is it good? Is it effective? Is there specific emphasis and focus on certain things at the expense of others? Who benefits? Who decides? All of that is part of your education system. The role of technology. I don't think I need to say a lot more. The role of technology. Economy and power. Can I live in a world where all of this is happening around me and I am absolutely clueless about how the economy works and how power works in the world? Can I truly be an agent in this world? Someone who has an ability to change anything, to cause anything? If I don't even understand how economy or power work. And then here will be, inshallah, the linkages back to, therefore, the hadith that talk about the necessity of understanding the world you live in, the times you live in, the people you live with, understanding who your enemy is, understanding what the challenges are, and so on and so forth. And there's quite a lot of these hadith. And they're blunt and they're direct. They don't need a lot of interpretation and explanation. So these become our applications of these ahadith. And then finally, perhaps we talk a little bit about what we started with as one of the questions, some notions, some ideas, some references to what is beyond the material world. Because everything we just talked about is quite material. This is the day-to-day life that we live. But is there more? And is there a necessity to have knowledge of what is more? So I only listed one example here. For instance, the notion of barakah, blessing, or barakah. What is this notion? Is it useful? What does it teach me about how the world works? Is it something that I can use in my day-to-day life? And does it fit somewhere? Should it fit somewhere in my own program when I want to study what religion tells me I should be studying? So with all of this is what we wanted to cover for today. I didn't want to go further into the actual topic. Inshallah, starting next week, we begin with what we said we would begin with. So the general principles, and then we will inshallah start to drill down into religion and other specifically mentioned types of knowledge, inshallah. If there are any questions, concerns, comments about anything that we said today, happy to hear you out and discuss anything. Otherwise, we can wrap it up, inshallah, and then have a bit of a discussion. I'd like a bit of feedback on the curriculum that is being presented. As we said, right now it is designed for about 15 lessons, 15 courses. I don't know if when you saw the amount of information we're trying to go to, how you think all of this will fit into 15 courses, but inshallah we will make it work. Unless, of course, there's interest to spend a bit more time on some of these. So depending on the feedback, depending on the interest, we can certainly, for some of these, expand and make them a little bit longer, a little bit more detailed. Add anything that you think is completely missing. If you think there's anything in here that is entirely irrelevant and useless, let me know as well, so that we have still time to modify the curriculum for this next series of lectures, inshallah. So if any questions, concerns, comments, after a loud salawat, let's hear your questions. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah yakhlikum. The agenda will be posted somewhere soon? Inshallah. So, ahsantum. It's actually a really good point. I wanted to start with that and I didn't. So I did want to thank, there are brothers and sisters who are spending time creating an infrastructure for these types of courses. They've created a platform and inshallah. So as usual, all of the lectures today, it's not live broadcast, but inshallah in the future it will be. For now it's a recording and it will be uploaded on the channels, on a couple of YouTube channels, and as well on the LMS platform that has been created. So every week it will be there. The PDFs, everything that you're seeing, you don't need to write anything. All of this will also, a PDF of this will be on the LMS as well for anyone to access, go back to and use, inshallah. And the intention is to create more. So there are some brothers and sisters interested in creating discussion groups, and there are other projects that they want to create from these series. So all of this is entirely up to you. These are your courses, these are your initiatives. You know, please work together, create anything you want out of them that you think is useful or beneficial. Inshallah. Ahsantum. Allah yakhlikum. Tafadhal.
Sayyidina, we talked a bit about history and how you would be willing to kind of have it be a bit longer. So I was hoping that we could specifically talk a bit more about whether history actually repeats itself or not, since I've recently been exposed to like game theory, and it seems to work from the limited view that I've gone. So I was hoping that we could kind of see what Islam says about it, and whether history actually repeats or it eventually happens once.
Ahsantum. So for sure it's part of what we're planning to at least mention, and we can make some references to some of the big authors and works in this field too. You'll notice that apart from the religious knowledge, I always try to present the information as soon as, for instance, we talk about all the other fields. I always try to link the Islamic content and what we find in the riwayat and the ahadith to also what is happening in the Western world and what scholarship says about it, what you find in the academic world, what you find in culture, what you find, so that it becomes relevant and so that we find a way to speak the same language as today's world. So for these topics, for sure, inshallah, there's definitely an intent to, I'm not going to say cover them, but there was an intent to at least mention a little bit on them. Any more detail, we could spend a little bit more time on it. So depending on the interest, we could spend more time. For now, for sure, it will be touched upon. Allah yakhlikum. Tfaddal.
Sayyid, I don't know if it's been on your radar yet, but like at least for high school or university studies, we go through a lot of philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Rousseau, Karl Popper, many examples. Any chance we'll be talking about Islamic philosophers in a bit more detail?
Very interesting question. In short, there was no intent to address philosophy directly. You will notice in general that in my lessons, wherever the opportunity allows for it, I will make references to philosophy. We spent a lot of time on philosophy in the previous kind of topic where we spoke about the intellectual. And we've done that in a few places here and there as well in this series. Here, I don't know how much there will be. For instance, in history, there's a lot of possibility to talk about philosophy. And there will be a lot of mentions to the general, let's say, the philosophy of education when we talk about education systems. Some of the big thinkers and what they have said about this. And we will refer to some philosophical works and names when we talk about kind of an understanding of society, how the world works, and all of that. Beyond that, please don't be shy to ask your questions, and that will give me an opportunity to address philosophers. Otherwise, there is nothing here specific that would have us invoke or refer too much to philosophers in this part of the series. And maybe a quick remark here, just as a comment to your question. As much as I think it's important to study philosophy, and I have certainly spent my fair share of my life studying philosophy, both Western and Islamic, part of the series is try to counter that from a specific angle. As important as it is, I think, as necessary as it is to understand philosophy, philosophers, their thoughts, and so on and so forth, there are huge benefits to that. At the same time, in a lot of cases, my experience has been with most people that it starts to be at the expense of religious knowledge. So people who spend 10 years studying Mullah Sadra can tell you the opinions of Mullah Sadra much better than they can tell you what Imam al-Sadiq says. And this is very problematic. Mullah Sadra is a man like you and I, who spent his life studying. He came up with his own theories and with his own ideas, and he wrote them down. There is right and there is wrong in them. Al-Sahrawardi is no different, and Ibn Sina is no different, and Al-Farabi is no different, and Al-Ghazali is no different, and so on and so forth until today. They are amazing scholars, they are incredibly brilliant minds, they are encyclopedic minds, but they are not Ahlul Bayt. And to us, Ahlul Bayt are infallible. They are a source of knowledge. In these cases, they are people entitled to their opinions. And all of this, simply to say, part of the vision of this series is to bring back intentionally people to the original scriptures of our religion. So when I say Ibn Sina and Mullah Sadra, this is not my original scripture. This is a commentary, this is a gloss, right? This is someone who has come and given me their interpretation of something in religion. Verses of the Qur'an, dua, hadith, Mullah Sadra is one of them, right? He has written his glosses on Al-Kafi and his 7-volume tafsir of the Qur'an and so on and so forth. But he is giving me his interpretation of something. And that is worth a lot. And to me there are, as I said, huge benefits to studying philosophy. It allows your mind to become extremely sharp, extremely accurate. It gives you, it's like a muscle. It allows you to deal with abstract notions with clarity. This is the strength of philosophy. The longer you spend time studying philosophy, the more you become a specialist of notions, of ideas, of things that are abstract, that day-to-day people don't deal with. Day-to-day people are dealing with things, tangible, material things. They're not dealing with ideas. Philosophy teaches you to deal with ideas. How do you define something properly? When you say a term, when you say a word, you want to truly use it in a very accurate way. This is what philosophy gives you. It gives you the tools to do that. It gives you a critical mind, not to be satisfied with superficial understanding. You keep asking, but why? And how does this relate to everything else I know? Does it still make sense? Is it still coherent or not? Huge benefits to studying philosophy. The more you study it, the more you work these muscles. But philosophy is not a source of knowledge in itself. It's a tool. It's an instrument. It gives you an ability to do something. And to us, the sources of knowledge, in this case, we're focusing on religion. My source of knowledge here is to try to see, and to someone looking from the outside, I would say the same thing. I'm not trying to tell you this is right, this is wrong. I'm telling you this is what Islam says. Go do whatever you want with it. But I first need to know, what does Islam say about this? And Islam is not equal to a philosopher, as great as they may be. Islam is equal to Qur'an and hadith. That's all I have that is original content from my religion. Everything else is a commentary upon, you add the hermeneutic component to it, right? It's an explanation, it's an interpretation, it's a gloss on something. I want to focus on the something, on the origin in this series. So this is just kind of a side remark, but since you asked the question this way, I'm telling you kind of the deeper vision behind this type of series. Yeah. تفضل. الله يعافيكم.
I'm just curious about, so much of education, the education system growing up here, particularly with history, does focus on so much on, you get a little bit of Egyptian history, and then an overwhelming amount of time spent on like the Roman history and the Greeks, and there's just like 1,000 years or so that are missing in terms of the Islamic Golden Age and things like that. And I'm just curious if part of this series will be touching on, for example, the father of Greek philosophy in the way that he was actually a Lebanese man that was living in Greece. So like the father of Greek philosophy has been erased out of history as being somebody who was Muslim and from the Middle East. And so I was just curious about if part of this series, could address some of the erasure of Islamic historians or history or inventors, or particularly like the Islamic Golden Age and how much we've contributed to other civilizations and societies from medicine and onward.
Thank you for the question. It was not part of the initial intent, but the way you framed the question, I think there is perhaps at least value in touching on it. And with that, maybe mentioning some of the scholarship that has taken place to focus a little bit on this specific topic that you talked about. So we can talk a little bit about that, inshallah.
I appreciate it. Even just references to
Yes.
Islamic historians that speak in English and Arabic, if possible. Just having grown up here, English is I'm much stronger in it, but I know that limits, obviously, the exposure one can get. So if you can even just offer guidance as to like where one can really learn about Islamic history in terms of the contributions, that would be, I know of Dr. Roy Casagranda, for example, who has been extremely helpful, but if you have any others in the future, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, so inshallah. And maybe the names, so you referred to maybe Muslim or Islamic historians, some of them are not at all. And they have done amazing work. Entirely Western scholarship has looked at this question too. And there are impressive works, some of them small, some of them big, that have to do with this whole idea of, the missing part of Western history that is entirely dependent on Islamic history and Islamic heritage. And there's still a lot of work to be done there. But there are works definitely that are worth mentioning. So inshallah, we'll add that maybe at least in mention as part of Islamic history. Any other questions, comments? تفضل.
Just to touch on the history aspect, is we talked about a little bit about the Renaissance and so on, and how the world from that point on kind of made a shift, or at least the Western world made a shift away from religion and towards, let's say, materialism or whatnot, and that reverberated across the world. Nowadays, and realistically, how much was that really stripped away? Was it always there in the background or not? Where now you see a rising, kind of from the opposite direction, kind of come back into there. And maybe some aspects of it are extreme or whatnot. So kind of touch upon understanding what that new wave is, and also where do we as Muslims, or inshallah strong Muslims, fit within this society and how to contribute positively to it. And in terms of what I'm talking about historically speaking, is like, when can we take parallels from how the Imams and Ahlul Bayt in their times dealt with rising authoritarianism, being a minority in their respective areas, and how they were able to still contribute and do and whatnot, despite the oncoming pressure against them. And then that would touch on the last point of power and economics, how important that is to understand more.
Your question is multi-layered, but the turn away from, let's say, the traditional values that happened during the Enlightenment towards modernity, and then what we're seeing today in the world, which looks like it's a return back to more traditional values, at least in pockets here and there in Western society, and then maybe drawing parallels to the lives of the Imams and what happened there. I don't know how natural the parallels are going to be. What you talked about from the lives of the Imams and where to focus on, so let's say, what it means to live as minorities in societies that are authoritarian, tyrannical, oppressive, unjust, the ideas from power and economy and being able to have agency in the world, all of that, yes, inshallah, we can certainly talk about that. I wasn't thinking of addressing it directly, but if there's interest, we can certainly talk about it directly. And the linkages between the two, so each one of them separately, no problem, inshallah, we can touch on both. The linking together, I need to think a little bit about it to see how to link the two together into kind of one coherent whole. And maybe if we talk, you tell me a little bit more what you have in mind, inshallah. Any other questions, comments, concerns? So generally speaking, the structure looks good. It's 15 lectures. Okay, even though everybody's asking for a lot more. You have to find a way to make it fit. تفضل.
I would be, it would totally be acceptable and understandable, granted the nature of the concepts and what you're covering, for it to be longer, but I don't want to, for me that would be amazing. So.
Okay. تفضل.
I think there may be a common ground with your topics and with Islamic philosophy brought from the brother, but taken from the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt to explain not per se how the world works, but how, let's say, the world was formed, or a chain of command, for example, such as divine simplicity with the first intellect and the second intellect, coming from historical debates with the Imams. So I don't know if you have a section to throw that in there, or maybe touch on that, I think it would be beneficial. Or to dive in, like, yeah, with divine simplicity, certain topics like that. I think Imam Ali, Imam al-Rida, and Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam do a very good job explaining that.
Yeah. I think to give it its proper due, though, it would require its own kind of series. We would have to go through kind of the general understanding that we find in the philosophical schools, and we see even the evolution that happened. You know, if you move from Farabi all the way to Mullah Sadra, there's a huge evolution happening there. And then even, you know, if you want to follow that school of thought, Mullah Sadra is basically, he brought together the 4 big schools of thought into one, into his own, right? The 4 completely isolated school. Like you have Kalam, that's a completely different school of thought than the Illuminationist school of Sahrawardi, or the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, he brought all of these 4 together into one school, and then that school evolved all the way to its most modern version under Sayyid al-Tabatabai and his students. Okay, that, like, if you want to trace the history and the evolution of philosophical thought in this way. Otherwise, the rest of the philosophical thought that we have, let's say in the Islamic world, is not traditional at all. It cut off with the tradition. This is the only one that is still a live tradition, so to speak. The others, they've become entirely contemporary modern, right? So you do have Islamic philosophers, but they are working with the tools of the times now, and they're not part of the living tradition, so that you say, you know, they are an extension of. And that by itself, like, would require its own discussion. Do you take the versions of the ideas as they appeared at the time of Ibn Sina or Mullah Sadra or Sayyid Tabatabai? And then which one do you compare to, let's say, the words of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, or, you know, Imam Ali alayhi salam in Nahj al-Balagha, Imam al-Rida when he spoke in his debates, or Imam al-Sadiq, and so on and so forth. I'll think about it. I don't think it's a natural fit. I think to give it its proper due, it deserves its own, you know, just going through the text and giving examples from, you know, a couple of lines in Nahj al-Balagha would require, you know, a good 30, 45 minutes of explanation to explain, you know, the notions, and then to compare those with what we find in philosophical works, where there's agreement, where there is a gap. So I'll think about it. I understand what you're saying, so we'll see, inshallah. But I appreciate the idea very much. Ahsantum. Okay, so let's stop here, and we can continue the discussion informally, and see you all inshallah next week, same time. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.